Assalamu alaikum students, welcome to lecture number 23, and today we are going to talk about very important area. And you see on the slide the title of today's lecture is Assessment in Language Teaching. We have been talking about so far that how to teach language and how to teach language at the micro level, right? And we saw how to make a lesson plan for teaching English as a foreign language, and then also we discussed micro teaching, right? And you all know that we also saw in the last lectures that particularly when you teach language to adults or you teach language to the beginners, so what should we do, right? And in the last semester, of course, again I would remind you that we talked about different methods that we can use to teach English as a foreign language. So today we're going to start assessment in language teaching, and we will spend 2 lectures on this area, which is very important, and that's why it is part 1 of this assessment. The series, there are 2 lectures of the assessment. So part 1 we'll talk about today, and part 2 we will move on to the next lecture. That would be lecture number 24. Today we are here for lecture number 23. So as usual, what to do? Let's review the last lecture. Which was the last lecture, my dear students? It was lecture number 22. Fine. What did we talk about that? If you remember, try, rack your brains, think again, see your notes, right? That lecture 22, what was that about? Which area we discussed? Which area of language teaching? Yes, you're right. We had a detailed discussion in our last lecture, right? So I'm sure you know that. Teaching, yes, speaking skills, and I told you the scope of this area, that these days in the private sector you will find a large number of institutes, centers where they help learners to improve their speaking skills, and they call it spoken English, right? So that's why, you must have seen, and also this is an opportunity for you that once you complete this course, this Masters in English, so you will be looking for jobs, in fact, at different educational institutions where language is taught, and you will be part of that faculty, right? So once you will be part of that faculty, so of course you would know that in fact what is language teaching, and for you it would be very easy job. Why? Because you have spent, in fact, almost 1 year, right, in this particular course, that is teaching of English as a foreign language. And you are lucky enough that, of course, your university has given you this opportunity, that considering the importance of this course, 6 credit hours have been allocated, have been given to this the course, that is teaching of English as a foreign language, right? So for you the job would be easy. You would be better than those beginners, right? Because there would be some people, of course, they would not know ABC of teaching English as a foreign language. So you are lucky enough that, you see, we had, of course, we talked a lot on this area, and we talked about the method that we can use, we talked about the principles, we talked about the activities, right? And in this semester particularly, we in fact went to the class. You see, we learned how to begin a class, we learned how to proceed a class, and we learned how to, in fact, conclude a class, right? So the last lecture was on teaching speaking skills, and you remember we talk about characteristics of what? Spoken language. And I'm sure you all remember that one of the characteristics was that, you see, the speaking is what? That you have very less time, right? So the point is that, you see, and when you speak and you have to express your message, you have to communicate your the message in the available time, right? And then we also saw that, you see, when you speak, right, you cannot undo your message. So that's why before speaking you take time, you think what to say, right? Since of course this is the characteristics of the spoken English, I mean, you don't have enough time, you see. So this is one of the characteristics we saw in our last lecture. And again, then we saw what were the principles for designing speaking activities, and we saw that you need to see the resources available, you need to know your learners, in fact, their level of understanding, right, and which program they are, in fact, of course, they have been enrolled in. So accordingly, what you do, that you, of course, you keep the principles for designing speaking activities. And then of course when using group work in speaking activities also, because once you have a group work for speaking activity, what happens that, you see, students get themselves involved in that activity, and they find this activity enjoyable for them, you see. And what else happens, that you see, students do not get bored, right? Once there is a speaking activity in the class, once there is a pair work or there is a group work going on in the class, so what happens, you see, people find it a good activity, right? And then once they find it an enjoyable activity, a useful activity, so they put their efforts, right? And in a group work, another advantage is that, of course, students come from different backgrounds, their understanding level is different, their competence is different, that of course their competence level is different. So what happens? So they exchange views, they exchange information, and ultimately what happens, that, you see, they perform well. And above all, once students are directed or put in different groups, so they socialize with one another, and this process of socialization, my dear students, in fact help them to grow, help them to learn, help them to talk, right, in that language. And of course there is integration of skills, because students speak, right, they express their feelings, and at times, you see, once they have negotiations, they in fact negotiate on certain areas, right, and at times they show their happiness, right, at times they show their sadness, or at times they show their seriousness, right. So all these things, my dear students, of course we observe, right, in what? In group activities. So then we saw what are the common types of speaking activities. It can be, in fact, an individual, of course, you can call it public speaking, right, where a student comes in front of the audience and speaks on a particular topic, right. Generally, of course, in spoken English the classes, what happens is that teachers assign topic to the students, and the students come prepared on those topics, and they speak on that, right. So initially, of course, for the first month, I mean, in these spoken English institutes or in the universities, the teachers, in fact, give topics to the students. What students do, they go back their homes. What they do, they in fact gather information from different sources, right? They consult dictionaries, they read newspapers, they download information, right? And they prepare themselves well, because it's a beginning, and once you begin, so you need more information. So for the first month, students give more time to their speaking skills, because they had to face the audience and they have to speak on that. So more preparation is required. However, in the second month, things become more convenient for them, because in the first month they try to overcome the stage fear, the shyness that they have, the problems that they have. In the second month, they find it easy to face the audience, right? to some extent they overcome their stage phobia, right? So in the second month of a language course, the teachers even change the activity and they move on to debates, right? Once the teacher feels that now students have gained confidence, now they are not reluctant to express themselves, fine, now they are at ease on the stage, so the teacher in fact assigns them certain topics, and the students in fact of course give their views. So the next phase, maybe the topics can be debatable topics in fact, right? So in this way the activities move on, and of course once the students find it easy to have debates, find it easy to speak on a particular topic, and then of course they can be given some role plays, they can be dialogues in fact, where students are asked to write dialogues, and of course in a time they can be in fact off the cuff activities, on spot topics can be assigned. So in this way what happens that you see the speaking activities in fact of course are changed, and the learners of course find it easy, right? Because slowly and gradually if you move right in your language class, of course when you are teaching speaking skills, right, so students would be more interactive, they take more interest in such activities, right? So, and then of course we talked about that picture can be used, a very good activity, picture description. You can bring innovative pictures, you can bring new pictures, you can bring pictures that can be interpreted in different ways, right? So again this can be a very useful activity for teaching speaking skills, right? And then some other activities, of course, you can invite someone as a guest speaker and ask your students to hold a workshop. So this one, of course, it happens that once you feel that now students are good at public speaking, they are good at debating skills, now they can easily negotiate a matter, they can easily have a dialogue, right? So what happens, you see, then my dear students, of course the students in fact can adjust themselves for any activity that the teacher assigned them, and of course maybe at near the of course completion of the course, and what teachers do, that they give activities on the spur of the moment, right? And they expect that the learners would be able to in fact understand that activity, and they would be able to exercise that activity. I mean here, I mean of course in the best possible way. So these are something that we talked about in our last lecture. Again, I would say that teaching speaking skill is an art, and this needs of course continuous efforts on behalf of the teacher, right? And of course, while teaching speaking skills, I mean, teachers must realize, teachers must know that of course tomorrow these students would be in the market, they would be in their work places, so they have to interact, right? So considering these factors, considering these external factors, teachers of course in fact keep on updating their speaking activities, fine, and they keep on motivating their learners. So if they keep on motivating their students and they keep on updating their speaking activities, so attendance would be more in the class. Otherwise generally there is a problem in spoken English classes, and particularly in speaking skills, that the students bunk off the classes. So we can in fact overcome this problem, we can obviate this problem, right, by making our speaking skills activity more interactive, more meaningful, innovative, right, and taking situations from the real life, right? So I mean the teacher can do a lot in this regard, and in considering against that it is very important skills for the learners, right? If they are good writers, if good readers, fine, but if the learner is unable to express his message in speaking, right, so it is considered that he may not be able to express well. So that's why focus should be of course, given, more focus should be given to speaking skills of your learners. So this was the lecture that we had yesterday. Today we are going to start assessment, how you assess your students, and particularly when we teach language, right? So what is assessment? What are the principles of assessment? What is in fact criterion? So here is of course mean that aims of this lecture, that is 23, that what is assessment, for example, why we assess people, right? So of course every day you see that there was an assessment, there was a test, there was a quiz, there was an exam. So here we teach language to our students. We are language teachers, right? So we are teaching English as a foreign language. So we feel that assessment is important. We need to assess them, right? How much the students have learned, right? And of course, I mean, where do they stand, right? And then again, how assessment is done and when it should be done, in fact, right? What are the factors that can make assessment, of course, more fruitful, more useful? We have to see it. So dear students, assessment purpose is important, right? Then assessment methods, right? I mean, and then of course assessment criteria, assessment principles, and testing in language assessment. In fact, this is what we have to see, because whatever, I mean, our topic is assessment, but we need to know why we assess, what is the purpose of assessment, right? Because if the purpose is clear, then we can think of the methods of assessment, and then of course once we have the method, then we think of the criteria, fine, and then of course we need to have the principles to make our assessment useful, and then of course how we can do, how can we test students, in fact, particularly language assessment. So dear student, this is what of course the lecture is about, right? And I told you that we will spend 2 lectures on this topic, assessment, fine. Now understanding assessment I mean we try to understand what is itself assessment, what is it, right? So whenever you start a topic, my dear students, so this question comes to your mind, that what is assessment itself, right? So then you say, of course, that of course, like maybe you would be thinking of assessment means an exam, assessment means of course a quiz, assessment means an interview, assessment means of course a public speaking activity, or it means of course a dialogue, right? It means a formal interview. So exact, see, because once you teach language, you have to assess, right? You teach listening skills, of course you have an assessment. What we do, that you have a cassette player, you have a CD with you, you play a chunk of a dialogue and you ask the student to summarize, right? Or maybe there are some questions in your CD or DVD, so you in fact play those the questions and you expect answers from your students. So of course in this way generally you assess your listening skills. And the speaking, of course, the common ways of assessing speaking skill is that what you do, of course, once the course is about to complete, you invite your students one by one, and of course you give them certain topics, and then you ask them to explain about those topics, or to give their views on that given the topic, or you ask them, you see, you ask them certain questions, fine, and those questions in fact once they are asked and the replies come from the students, so those reply in fact help you assess those learners well. And you will come across some students, they express themselves well, and you say, well, of course this student is a good student, and see, of course he practiced speaking and he practiced listening, and now he's able to listen. But you will find some students who are unable to express themselves, right? So of course assessment is important. Assessment in fact tells us that where do our student stand, right? And of course again assessments of course help us to improve our the teaching of foreign language, because for the coming batches this feedback can help us improve our teaching methodology. So there are some tasks, in fact. I mean, here is talking about what is assessment, a list of understanding assessment given by different teachers. What do you think of them? It is to do with testing, right? I told you that when you test, why you assess? To test people, right? And the test is, of course, mean that how much they have learned, right? So the test, right? We use test, of course. I have a test today, of course, or I took a test yesterday. So finding out how good you are at something, because once assessment is done, so that assessment, in fact, finds out. What does it find out? That how good you are at listening, speaking, reading, writing. Fine. So of course there is another view of assessment, right? And the teacher says, I used to keep a check on my learners by spelling. Fine. Test, small quizzes, and things like that. So of course, I mean, yes, in some the classrooms, once the teachers give more tests, more quizzes to the students, so those tests, in fact, those quizzes, they help the students. In fact, there is a check on the students, that of course where do they stand, how much they have learned, and all that, right? So in this way, my dear students, you see, what happens is that, you see, assessment is evaluated or interpreted, that to have a command and control in your class, you do assessment. It is an ongoing process which focuses on the whole life of our school, institute, university, whatever, finding out if we are being effective, right? And definitely, of course, you see around, right, you visit any school, college, university, you will find proper exam system is there, right? If you talk about the annual system, you talk about the semester system, there is evaluation, right? And even if you compare the annual system of exam with the semester system of exam, and you will find out that there is more evaluation in semester system as compared to the annual system. In annual system, of course, what happens that you have to take in one exam at the end of the course, and if you perform well, you are successful. If you could not, you fail. However, in the semester system, I mean, the good thing is that you are being evaluated from the day one till the last day of the course. So in this way, what happens, right? In this way, of course, students remain under, of course, observation, and they keep on working, they keep on, in fact, putting efforts to improve themselves, right? It's an ongoing process. We talked about that. I feel as though it is big stick hanging over our heads, teachers' evaluation and all that. And even, of course, sometimes that this assessment, of course, another teacher says, it is a stick hanging on your heads, right? I mean, on the heads of the students. And also, of course, if there is a proper system in a university, in a college, so even the same happens there. A big stick hanging on your heads, so that works. So dear student, this is what what is assessment and the teacher's views about assessments, right? And that could be, of course, the finding out the strengths and weaknesses of our students and ourselves, because once you test the students, once you give them tests, so you try to find out that how much they have learned, what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses. So in other words, it can be a SWOT analysis of your students, right? And I use tests in my classroom. I use also quizzes as a way of keeping a check on the students' learning. I also mark their work, sometime with a grade, but usually a comment. Again, another teacher says that, of course, he writes comments, right? It is to do with what? Record keeping, collecting information about how well the students are doing. Right? Once if I give example of the university teaching, when you teach language in a university level, so what happens that, of course, you give them assignments, you give them the quizzes, you give them the projects, right? So over there, of course, what you do, that you evaluate, right? You evaluate the students, in fact, that on the basis of what? Their performance. This is what happens, that you see, you evaluate the students on the basis of their performance. So that was, in fact, what is the assessment, right? That what is assessment. I told you earlier that what teachers think of assessment. Now, this is the point, was that we understanding assessment, right? Now you need to know the differences between testing, assessment and evaluation. So students, before we move on, you need to know the differences between the testing, assessment and evaluation. Now what is testing, by the way? It often takes the pencil and paper, right? I mean, you know, these things are there, my dear students. What is testing itself, right? And then find what is assessment, and of course what is evaluation. These are the concepts. You need to differentiate between these three concepts, and of course once you know these concepts, then it would be easy for you to know, and but of course once you know, you can easily exercise these things. So the testing is one. So what happens in testing? It often takes the pencil and paper form, and it is usually done at the end of learning period, such as university test, midterm test, semester test. Like I have just talked about this, that in a semester system, what happens, that you see, once you complete 1 month of your teaching, so in fact you give a test to the students, right? It can be called as monthly test, right? And sometimes or sessionals. In the semester system of examination, so more testing is there, more exams are there, right? So exams after 1 month, exams after 2nd month, and sometimes they call it midterm exam, that is after 2 months, because generally semester duration is 4 months in our public sector, and of course private sector universities. So after 2 months, and of course a testing is done, tests are given, and they call it sessional, or they call it what? Midterm exam. And again there is exam after remaining 2 months, so we call it end term or terminal examination. So this is what mean the testing is there. And then assessment, it involves the what? Collecting of information or evidence of a learner's learning progress and achievements over a period of time for the purpose of improving teaching and learning, right? The testing, you know that at the end of course, end of the month or 2 months, 4 months, you give a test. Assessment, collecting of information, right, involves the, of course, collection of information or evidence of a learner's learning progress and achievements over a period of time for the purpose of improving teaching and learning, right? So I mean, this is in fact the more focused, right? Testing may be more traditional, right? Because the whole year what you do, you work, and at the end of the year you take your English exam, like your inter, you took that compulsory exam, of course, and maybe in your metric, in your BCom, right? So over there, I mean, there was exam, a test was there, but here assessment, right? So here when you see the assessment, it states that we collect information, right? And how do you collect information? You use various tools, various sources, right, to get information. You may, in fact, you can give questionnaire to the students, and you can invite the students. You can have a one-to-one chat with the students. So in fact, collection of information or evidence of learners' learning progress, right, an achievement over a period of time, right, for the purpose of what? Improving teaching and learning. Our intention is to improve teaching and learning. In fact, what we do, we improve teaching and learning. And how can we improve? For example, you see that there's a class of 15 students, and 5 students, in fact, initially, of course, once they started off the class, they were a bit reluctant, right? And of course you have seen them, right? You have notified them that these people in fact need more attention. Now you start after a week. In fact, you in fact have a meeting with those 5 students, and you try to know their problems. In fact, and you had a counseling session with them. I mean, you want to help them so that those 5 students would go with the remaining 10 students. So maybe after a week you feel that, of course, I mean, that those students, I mean, once you interview them, once you talk with them, you would realize that yes, they are better in the class now. Or you feel that whatever instructions you gave them initially didn't work, right? And you saw that instead of progressing, they are regressing, right? So, and then you think of that why it has happened, right? So, and then you, of course, I mean, change the policy, change your plan, and you see again, you hold meetings with them, and the purpose is, of course, to improve them. So this is what an assessment is done, right? You want everybody to in fact to move forward, right? And it doesn't mean that the shining students would be discouraged and only the weak, they would be given more priority. No, of course, that those who are doing well, fine, they need appreciation, and those who are weak, they also need what? Elevation. So we need to keep in mind our class, of course, the students. So this is my dear students, that is, assessment is more continuous, more the focus, and for this you need to have reliable tools, right, so that information could be taken from your learners. And once you take that information, you in fact utilize that information, right? And that information should be utilized for the well-being of your students, for the well of your students, right? Because if the students feel that they're improving, so I mean you are doing well. And if you feel that there is a problem, if the dropout ratio is high, you need to rethink your teaching methodology. So dear student, this is what we call it, assessment. Then, of course, evaluation involves making an overall judgment about one's work or a whole school's work, right? According to Cameron, it can be concerned with the whole range of issues in and beyond language education. Lessons, courses, programs, and skills can all be evaluated. So once there is evaluation, of course, the whole process as a whole evaluation is done. Right? Not only that we evaluate only the teaching, of course, of the language, we also in fact evaluate the environment, we also evaluate the resources available, we also evaluate in fact the learner's capability in fact. So evaluation is in fact the broader term, right? And when you evaluate, of course, you see many things in mind. Not only just one thing that testing is done, or of course that is second one is assessment, and then here evaluation. So overall judgment about one's work or a whole school's work, in fact, that is what evaluation is there. So you need to know the difference between testing, assessment and evaluation. We call it TAE, right? Testing, assessment and evaluation. Well, students, so what is the purpose of assessment, in fact, that we have to see? So assessment in ELT means, of course, to discover what the learners know and can do at a certain stage of the learning process, right? I mean, we need to know that why assessment is a must, why we need assessment, right? So dear students, of course, when you are a language teacher, you are a student of this course, so we need to know that why we do assessment. What is the purpose of assessment? To discover what the learners know and can do at a certain stage of learning process. Clear? That this is what, very simple, the purpose is to know what the learner has learned, right? Maybe, of course, the purpose is that where does the learner struggle, right? So that's why assessment is vital, right? Assessment, of course, gives you, I mean, a message that of course, where of course this assessment gives us a message. Assessment prepares us, right? That what we have done, right? And what is the result, and which areas we need to work on, what are our strengths, right? And what are our weaknesses. If you feel that the whole class flunks, for example, or if you feel that you are teacher of speaking skills but the students are unable to speak, if you feel that you are instructor of listening skills, and the students are unable to listen. So again, this is that you see, once you do assessment, so assessment in fact tells you that what has been done and how successfully it has been done. So what do you think are the process of assessment? If I ask you the question that what is the process of assessment in fact? Should it be done right regularly, or should it be done at the end like testing we talked about? Should it be assessment, should it be testing, or should it be evaluation? Right? This is of course when you have to see. So here are some, I give you some points, you can have a look at, my dear students. Well students, so talking about the assessment purpose in fact. So see, here are some points you can see on your screen, that why we do assessment. First of all, to discover learners' weaknesses. You say no, right? Or to discover learners' achievement. Fine, right? Or to evaluate the existing curricula. Right. Of course, once you do it, you feel that, well, you have done well, so good, right? And how can we improve it, right? Or to check upon teachers' performance. Of course, assessment is done because if the class performs well, it means that there is effort of a teacher behind. To motivate learners, right? To provide an incentive for learning. Clear? So once assessment is done and the teachers perform well, so I mean the situation provides incentives. Now the next point is that, well, of course, to provide the basis for further planning of teaching. What to teach next, right? Again, I mean, this is the purpose of this assessment, that to provide the basis for further planning of teaching, right? To qualify students, right? Because if assessment is positive, yes, students are promoted from certificate to diploma, right? Or to provide the basis for correction, no? To provide criteria for quality for higher level studies. Because assessment is that this assessment qualifies, if you successfully qualify a course, so you are, I mean, recommended for a higher course. To provide learner with the sense of accomplishment. Of course, when assessment, if students do well in the assessment, so it's a sense of satisfaction, accomplishment in fact, that they have done well. To foster the ability to learn, right? So, because if the students, they put efforts, they perform well, right? And of course in the assessment, you see, they get good grades, they get achievements, of course, accomplishments, you see. So appreciation, what happened? This helps them, of course, to learn more in fact. So dear student, this is what we call it assessment. A list is there, a sort of questionnaire is there, and we saw answers yes and no, and you came to know that, of course, why assessment is done. Now, if we move on more on the assessment purpose, a close study on the assessment purpose will make it clear that all people involved in education, involved in teaching learning, involved in teaching English as a foreign language, have some reasons to consider assessment necessary. Now here there are three things, right? For administrators, right? For teachers. So if we quickly, for teachers and for the parents. So assessment is useful, right? I mean, of course, once you are running a language center, a language institute, right? And you, of course, make assessment a compulsory part of your teaching of English as a foreign language. So being the head of an institute, being an administrator, you have a purpose, right? You have a purpose of assessment, right? Every university, every college, every board, there is a system. Because there is no assessment, how would you? Because that assessment in fact testifies, certifies the learners that he is capable of doing this. He is capable of doing masters in this subject. So that is, of course, an assessment. For administrators, they need to know whether the programs they have planned to are working well. The only way to do this is to discover how well the students are doing with their courses. I mean, if they have launched, in fact, a spoken English course in a university, and of course administrators feel that, well, I mean, students are coming in this course and they are learning. Fine, they are enjoying this course and this course is really helping them out. So on the behalf of the administrators, yes, it's a success for them, right? That initially it was not the part of the programs, but in business program, for example, or IT program, the computer sciences programs, you see, once they have, of course, started a language program there, and they are realizing that, of course, English is a language of science, language of instruction, language of business. So why not to give this chance to our students that they would improve their speaking skills, reading skills, listening skills. So and of course, once the students have felt that, you see, it is very important, they need to work on it. And for administrators, they would be happy that the course they launched, it really worked, right? And in the private sector, of course, they have more objectives to achieve, because if they feel that they launched a course and a large number of students enroll themselves in the course, in fact, and on one hand the students are improving, there is value addition to the students, and secondly, of course, because once more students would means more money to the center, so they have to run the center, in fact, and they have to manage financial resources. So for this, definitely, running of a center is a must. So the more students mean more business for the administrators, for the other stakeholders. So for administrators, this is what you see, the assessment, the purpose. That program has been launched, has been started, and working well. For teachers put the administrators' plan into practice. Here these are what these people, they manage, they execute. In other words, that strategies are made by the top management, by the administrators, and these are the teachers who execute that, right? So plans into practice, they need to know what has been done and what needs to be done next. What the students already know, right, or can do, and what they do not know or cannot do yet. This is, for example, the teachers. Is that clear? So for teachers, in fact, they put the administrators' plan into practices. They need to know what has been done and what needs to be done next. Is that clear? This is what for the teachers. They are the executors. They are, in fact, the managers, and of course they are the leaders at times, because they lead the students. So this is what the purpose of assessment for the teachers, that whatever policies have been made, whether they have been put into practice or not. Fine. And if they have put into the practice, what is the result? Right? What those strategies were a real success or they were utter failure. For parents, they are anxious to know how their children are doing in their language center, in their school, college, university, wherever they are. Unable to watch their kids in the class, parents value the feedback about their children's performance from the teachers and the center or the school. Is that clear? So this assessment, in fact, is useful for the administrators, useful for the teachers, and also for the parents, because parents rely on the feedback given by the teachers, given by a center, because once a certificate is given to a student, so the parents find that this is a certified course and he has done something, and finally he got this certificate. So this is what mean assessment, the purpose for the administrator, for teachers, and for parents. Also for the students, they need to know what they have accomplished, be aware of what they need to work on next, right, and build up their confidence and satisfaction from what they have achieved, right. It should be noted that both positive and negative assessments should be made available to the learner as honestly as possible, right. So this is again because once assessment is done, right, and then the learners know about their strengths and they know about their weaknesses, and they know that where do they struggle and which areas they are good at. So I mean, this assessment is of course equally good for administrators, for parents, for teachers, and for the students, in fact. So my dear students, this is what means the purpose of assessment. I gave you views of different teachers on assessment, right? And then we try to differentiate between testing, evaluation, and assessment. And then of course we saw that assessment, in fact, the purpose of assessment is different for the teachers, for the administrators, for the parents, and for the students. These all four are the stakeholders, in fact, right? These can be affected, in fact, these can be beneficiaries, right, of course, of this assessment being done. Now moving on, methods for assessment, that how assessment should be done. What should be the effective methods, fine, for making assessment, I mean, a real success, or for doing what? Efficient assessment. Because if the methods are good, so we can say that the assessment would be equally good. So includes what? Testing about different, you see, if you talk about assessment, I mean, assessment methods, so assessment includes what? Testing, but definitely not only testing. Assessment is often divided into summative assessment and formative assessment. Now again, the new terms are there, right? We will see what is a summative assessment and what is a formative assessment. Can you tell me? Summative, sum, the word sum, you know, and think of summative, and formative mean a format, right? A format is there. So we'll discuss these assessments. That is, what is summative assessment and what is formative assessment. So now first method is summative assessment, right? It's mainly based on testing. It is done mostly at the end of a learning period or at the end of a college year, school year, whatever you are. I hope you understand, right? So dear students, this is what, that is, when you do this summative assessment, right, and you must have exercised, you must have experienced this, right, the assessment that is done at the end of a course, right, like if you are a part of a semester system, like here you are part of the program, right? You have to take some tests, quizzes are there, I mean, group discussion board is there, then of course quizzes are there, then the midterm is there, the 2 sessionals are there, and again there is a final examination. So summative means, you know, summit at the end, right? So mostly based on testing. It is done at the end of a learning period or at the end of a school year. Well students, so another method of assessment is, we call it formative assessment, right? I told you the word formative. So it is based on information collected in the classroom during the teaching processes for the purposes of improving teaching and learning. Therefore, it is sometimes termed as classroom assessment as well, right? It goes on, right? For example, you give an activity to the students in the class, and then you see, take a round of the class, you visit every student and you see that what is going on, and then you have a log file with you, and immediately there and then you just of course write down those things, right? Or maybe you have of course a report with you, of course a format, right? A ready-made format is there with you, and over there you keep on evaluating your students while the teaching goes on. So this is assessment, we call it formative assessment. It based on an information, right? Of course you collect information, and of course while teaching your students whatever skill you teach, and what the purpose is for improving teaching and learning. If you feel that this activity works well, pair works well in the class, and then you write the evaluation, and then you make it a compulsory part for the beginners, or you feel that the pair work may not be useful for adults, so next time you reconsider it while incorporating in the class. Therefore, it is sometimes termed as classroom assessment as well. Now, you need to know summative assessment and formative assessments. So, the ways to gather students' learning information, very important. What are the methods? What are the ways? What? Ways for? Ways to gather students' learning information. Teachers' observation, it's very important. Teachers, in fact, definitely they are the best evaluators. Fine. And I personally feel that while teaching, you can also evaluate your learners, right? Though, I mean, the teacher should not be biased, right? The teacher should be biasness free, in fact, right? He should not be biased against anybody, right? But the point is that he, in fact, of course, keeps on observing his learners. So observation never stops of a teacher. If the class is an ideal class, the strength is manageable, so observation can be done well. However, in a big class, this can be a problem. So teacher's observation, of course, of the learner's overall performance or achievements can be quite accurate and fair. And sometimes it happens that in a class, of course, the teacher's observations say that he is a good student. And once the same student takes exams, so he outperforms. He performs very well. So now, assessment of the teacher in the class and then his work, yes, there is harmony, right? So the work of the students, once he writes, right, and then, of course, then whatever teacher has observed, if there is a harmony, it's good. But sometimes it also happens that maybe some students, they outshine in the class. Fine, maybe they are good at spoken English, but when it comes to writing, so in the exam they cannot perform well. That happens sometimes, right? And some students, in fact, they perform very well in their test. However, in the classroom assessment, they may not do well. So again, it varies. There are some problems. For some time, you come across some dark horses, in fact. Right? Some students, in fact, they're really good in their written work, but when it comes to their performance, their communication in the class, at times they cannot express themselves well. So this is what, with experience, you learn, right? That some students, they do very well in the class. Right, they answer all the questions which are asked by the teacher. They help their friends, but when it comes to written work, they cannot express themselves well in writing. So maybe they practice more their spoken English as compared to their written expression. So this is again a problem. Continuous assessment, of course, because when the teacher starts the class, so assessment starts, in fact, from the day one. That's why people prefer semester system, right? Because in this system, in fact, this assessment begins, right, the day when the semester starts, in fact, and then it goes on till the last day of that program. Self-assessment and peer assessment, again, of course, is important, that every student assesses himself or herself, and then again peers also assess the students, right? So peer assessment also works, and sometimes it happens that when you are having an activity in the class, so you can assign this duty to the students in the class, well, assess them. So because there are 10 students in the class, so there will be 10 assessments. So definitely 10 assessments would be, of course, would have weight as compared to a single assessment. Sometime it can be done. All project work can be a way. You can use that. If the project is given well, right? If it is, a well planned or well thought out project, and if the students do it seriously, so again it can be a good source. And these days generally a problem is that project is given and the students, in fact, they download ready-made projects from the internet and they submit with little alterations, little changes. So even teachers are very busy, they cannot focus on that. So again here, if you are the teacher, you have given a project to your language students, right? So see that project, that whether it has been done by the learner or it was just downloaded and alterations were made and submitted. Again, the portfolios is a purposeful collection of materials assembled in fact over a period of time by a learner to provide evidence of skills, abilities and attitudes. Portfolio is in fact mean the collection of different, you have a larger portfolio, right? So again, this can be a way to get the students learning information, right? That if students student has a repertoire, of course, has a report, fine, and he keeps on updating whatever handouts you give to your students, or if the student, they put efforts and they get some material and they get a copy of that, so it means that their portfolio is bigger than the others. In fact, some students are there, you will find that what they do, they maintain a proper file for every course that they are having. For example, they may have a file for TEFL, they may have a file for stylistics, they may have a file for others. Even in different courses, they have subdivided that file into various sections. So that is what, my dear students, the ways to gather, of course, students in learning information. Assessment criteria is important. Now, what is the criteria of assessment, right? It is agreed that assessment means to discover how well learners know things or can do things, but well is often comparatively well, right? Not absolutely well, right? Again, of course, mind you that you all know that, of course, dealing with of course human beings, right? We cannot say anything that this is 100% right. Right? So again, this is a problem with social sciences. There is always room, right? And of course, in the social sciences, we deal with the society, we deal with people, right? And no two person can think alike, in fact, right? Maybe for one student it is maybe 90%, for other maybe it is 70%, right? So that's why, of course, comparatively well, not absolutely well, right? So depending on different assessment purposes and the stage at which assessment is made, assessment should be made according to different criteria or references. So we need to have some references or criteria to do our assessment. So here was first one is, we call it Criterion-referenced assessment, right? Our topic is that what is the criteria for assessment. So I told you that, well, not absolutely well, but comparatively well. So here first one is that criterion reference assessment, right? What is it? Criterion reference language assessment is based on a fixed standard or set of criteria. A fixed standard, fine? The national or local educational authority may have this standard or criterion, right? For example, you see that if the students, of course, is able to give his personal profile, right, or he's able to in fact express his views, people say, well, he can speak that. Or there was a time, if you remember, that of course our as far as literacy rate was concerned, right, we used to think that somebody who could sign, he's among the list of literate people. But with the passage of time, that definition changed, right? And now we see that one who can read and of course write Urdu, we can say he is among the list of literate people. So it changes, right, with the passage of time. Maybe of course now if you talk about this after a year or two, you will say one who can use computer, he is in the list of literate people. So this criterion reference assessment means that you have a fixed standard or what, set criterion. Then of course, and of course, like if you see, and of course in some education institutions you have a fixed criteria that if the student meets these values, so he will be successful. If he fails to meet this, he'll be, of course, he has to repeat that course. So that's why criterion reference assessment says that when you assess people, when you do assessment in language teaching, so this can be a criteria where you have a fixed standard. Say you have 100 questions. If the student is able to answer these 100 questions, so he'll be in the next grade. If he fails to answer 50 questions? No. Or if he fails to answer even one of the questions, he will not be qualified. Like you see, you have a fixed example. For passing that, students have to have 50% marks, right? Generally we say, or they should, in some public sector they say it's 33% marks, and semester system they say 50% marks. So again there is a fixed what? Standard. We call it criterion-referenced assessment, in fact. So there is in fact what? Non-reference assessment. First one is criterion, second one is norm, from the word norm. You know what are the norms? Yes. So norm-referenced assessment is designed to measure how the performance of a particular student or a group of students compare with the performance of another student or a group of students whose scores are given as the norm. There is one standard, right? So that is norm-reference assessment. That of course Ali see that of course his assessment is that what he got 95% marks, right? So that is a norm, of course, and then or taking one as a standard, right? Or for example, generally say in universities there is a system, right? GPS system, in fact, and universities keep on revisiting that in fact evaluation. The system, in fact, that of course initially it was 80 and above is 4, but now they say of course 90 people even reach 90%, right? So now they have said 90 and above mean A plus and 80 and above mean A grade, right? So a norm reference assessment, a student's achievement is therefore interpreted with reference to achievement of the other student or groups of students rather than to an agreed criterion. Right? Norm. The norm is that people get, that 10% people get 90%, right? So on the basis of this norm, so assessment is done, and this criteria is called norm referenced assessment. Third one is individual reference assessment. Now individual, we see, is based on how well the learner is performing relative to his or her own previous performance. Now at present, we forget his past performance, right? We just see how well he's doing, right? At present, right? This is what we call it individual referenced assessment, right? For example, if a student could only say a few words in English after a few months of the course, and now after another month's study, he's able to speak with some fluency, although there is some inaccuracy, we can surely say that he has made great progress. So at present, of course, see, he'll get better score. Of course, we forget his past. Maybe before the midterm, he was very slow learner, right? But now after the midterm, once you see that he has improved, of course, and he is improving and he is working on. So this, criteria of reference or assessment, we call it individual reference assessment. So dear students, this was our today's lecture. We talked about what is assessment, right? That of course, and you see assessment where you assess people, you assess your learners, in fact, learners of foreign language, right? And then we saw why we assess, what is the purpose of assessment, and we saw that of course the purpose of assessment is different for different stakeholders. For administrators, they have a different purpose of assessment, for the parents, right, and for the students, right, you see. So and for the teachers, these are the four stakeholders that they are directly affected, in fact, with this assessment that is done. The teachers, of course, and the administrators, the parents and the students. Fine. And then of course, what is the method of assessment? We saw that of course means summative method and what formative method. That summative mean of course at the end of the course of the period, right? And then formative mean as a set of principles. We have a formative assessment. And then we saw criterion. In fact, we talk about norm reference criteria, of course, individual reference criteria, you see, we talk about that. And then it's assessment principles and testing in language assessment. Of course, these 2 points we will see in more details in our next lecture. So till then, it's a time to say goodbye. See you in the next class.